it is a true privilege for me to open our program with a keynote from one of the most distinguished and inspiring scholars in the field of quality of life studies, Professor Sonja Lyubomirsky. Sonja, if I may, is a distinguished professor of psychology at the University of California, Riverside. She has published over 150 articles, and any brief summary of her work could hardly do it justice. So I'm not taking the risk right now. But among her research interests, you will find papers about the determinants of happiness, papers about hedonic adaptation, about happiness interventions, and her most cited paper is about the consequences, the benefits of happiness. And as of today, I checked this morning, has received more than 12,000 citations, according to Google Scholar. Her impact on our field speaks volume. With an H-index of 91 and over 86,000 citations, Sonja ranks amongst the world's most influential researchers in our field. Beyond academia, she is also the author of 2 global bestsellers, The How of Happiness and The Myth of Happiness, which have been translated over 35 languages. Her contributions have earned her many prestigious awards, including the Christopher J. Peterson Gold Medal, and her work continues to inspire not only us researchers, but also educators, policymakers, and everybody who wants or seek to improve their life and the life of others. As we begin what I believe is going to be a groundbreaking ISQOLS conference, there is truly no better voice to guide us through the science of human well-being and flourishing. The keynote will be followed by a Q&A, so please, I will really invite you to listen carefully to Sonja during the keynote and note down your questions. And without further ado, please join me in warmly welcoming our keynote speaker, Professor Sonja Lyubomirsky.
Good afternoon. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Yeah. So honored to be here at this special 30th anniversary of ISQOLS. This is my very first time in beautiful Luxembourg. I brought my daughter with me, so we'll hopefully have a lot of fun here. By the way, I know a lot of your names. I cite you or I've corresponded with you, and I'm excited to meet some of you this week. And let me see. Before I start, I wanted to give a shout out to all my fantastic PhD students and collaborators who have pioneered and really spearheaded the work that I'm going to talk about today. So I'm going to talk today about a subject that is near and dear to my heart, and I hope, I assume, also near and dear to a lot of hearts here, and that is the science of happiness, the science of well-being. I'm going to talk about how we all can become happier, how can we feel more connected, how do we flourish more at home and at work. This fall, I'm going to be celebrating the 36th anniversary of doing research on happiness. So I started in 1989, even before ISQOLS, so 36 years. And today I'm going to give you a flavor of the different kinds of experiments that my lab and I have done to study how happiness can shift over time. And I'm also going to give you a conceptual model of theoretical framework that drives our research and motivates predictions from the model. And this is also what my books, The How of Happiness and The Myths of Happiness, are about, that you can see here on the slide. So let me start by saying a few words about myself, I guess telling you a little bit about myself. So I'm an experimental social psychologist, and so I've been doing research on happiness since my first day of graduate school. And my last name, Lyubomirsky, which is, I've always hated it because it's hard to pronounce, no one can pronounce it, no one can spell it. But it means love and peace in Russian. I was born in Moscow, Lyubov and Mir. So it's kind of appropriate for someone who studies well-being science. And it's not easy to forget. Okay, so on the very first day of my PhD program, this was in 1989 at Stanford University in California, I met with my new PhD advisor. His name was Lee Ross, and he was a brilliant thinker and experimentalist. His field was conflict and negotiation, so kind of like the opposite to happiness. And so on that first day, we took a walk around campus, and we stumbled into the Rodin sculpture garden. And so I remember we spent time looking at the sculptures, and he told me, that a great psychology experiment is like a great sculpture, and I still remember that. He said, every time you look at it, every time you read it, every time you think about it, you have new ideas about it. You see something new in it, and I still think that's true. And then someone said, and I don't know who it was, but it was probably Lee, someone said, what do you think is the secret to happiness? And one of us said, well, why are some people happier than other people? And so this conversation is sort of still one that I'm having with my head, in my head with Lee Ross. He passed away a few years ago. And it really catapulted me into a long line of research on the science of happiness. I was a bit anxious and insecure when I first started doing this research. In my field in psychology, there was only one person, Ed Diener. And I'm, by the way, very honored to be giving the Ed Diener lecture. Really means a lot to me. I actually texted his son, Robert, to let him know. So Ed was the only one in psychology who was doing research on well-being, and so it was just considered like not a very scientific area of study. People thought I was crazy, in grad school to be studying it. So, and this is like, Amos Tversky was there. There were all these like, very prominent psychologists who were doing this really important work, and so here I am, like, interviewing people who are happy and unhappy. So anyway, I started studying happy and unhappy people, and I asked questions like, what makes happy people tick? How are they different from unhappy people? And then pretty soon, even in graduate school, journalists or the media found me, and they started calling me, and they started asking me questions like, what can we tell our readers about how they can be happy? And I would say, I don't know, or it depends, right? These are not answers that they liked, because I would find things like, happier people are more grateful than unhappy people, or happier people, my dissertation was on how happier people are less likely to compare themselves to others. And so I would say, well, this is just a correlation. Just because happier people are more grateful doesn't mean that if you ask an unhappy person to express gratitude more often, that they would become happier, right? We don't know this. And also back then, I was kind of elitist and misguided, and I thought I was a basic scientist, and that these questions were, quote, applied science questions, and so about how to become happier. Again, I was really misguided about the relationship between basic and applied research, because it's very, very connected, of course. And so it took me a while to realize that the question of how people can become happier is actually a really fascinating basic science question, right? How can we shift happiness up and down is a very interesting question. So that's what I started doing a long time ago. So I started studying that question. Okay, so what is happiness and why should we care about it? So let me just start with a definition. The definition of happiness that I use, I follow the late Ed Diener, the founder of the field, the psychological science of happiness. But by the way, I hate the term positive psychology. I was in the room where we discussed what to call this field. We all hated the term, by the way, and Marty Seligman kind of won. And so I don't think we need that term, so I never use it. I use the word well-being science or gratitude science or whatever it is that we're studying. Okay, so I believed, like Ed, that happiness has two components, subjective, a cognitive and an affective component. So basically, the first component is the experience of positive emotion. So happy people are more likely to experience pride, enthusiasm, serenity, affection, joy, interest, etc. But also the sense that their life is good, that they're progressing towards their life goals, that they're satisfied with their lives. And you can think of this as happiness involves being happy in your life and being happy with your life, or being happy in your life and being happy about your life. I should also add that people who report being happy in their lives and being happy with their lives basically experience more success in life. They experience countless benefits. As Anthony mentioned, we have this paper, highly cited paper from 2005 with Ed Diener and Laura King, where at the time we found all the happiness studies that we could find, which were 225 studies. Now, of course, there's hundreds and hundreds more. And so we basically concluded that happiness doesn't just make people feel good, it actually is associated with success in life. And so happier people are more productive, and they live longer, and they are better leaders and negotiators, and they are more likely to get married, and all of those things you're all familiar about. Many of you probably do this research. So fast forward to today, and again, there are hundreds more studies that basically are concluding that happier people have a lot of benefits, and companies with happier people are more successful, et cetera. So again, happiness isn't just selfish. It's not just something that feels good. It also has many benefits for ourselves and for our families and for our communities. Now, of course, the causality goes both ways. So, for example, getting married makes people more happy, but also happier people are more likely to find someone who wants to marry them. So the causality goes both ways. And so we and others review correlational studies, but we also review longitudinal studies, and we also review experimental studies to kind of try to triangulate on this question of what are the benefits of happiness. Okay, so I hope that you're all convinced, you already know that happiness is a good thing. It's associated with lots of success and good things in life. But the big question, the sort of the $1 million question or the $1 billion question is can we all become happier? Is it even possible to be happier? Let's see if this is the next slide. Not yet. Okay. Can all of us become happier if we simply put effort into it? Or can we help our children, our colleagues, our friends and family members, or our students and clients become happier? And I should mention that, again, I said that I'm an experimental social psychologist, so my training and my research is about how individuals can become happier. I don't study how structures and environments can facilitate happiness, which of course is hugely important, but that's not my area of research. So we'll talk today about how individuals themselves personally can become happier. Okay, so the answer is yes, we can become happier. That's why I'm here today. And so my talk today will be divided into sort of 4 quick sections. First, I'm going to talk about research on whether gratitude interventions can make people happier. Then I'm going to talk about how research on, I should point here, on practicing kindness can make people happier. Then I'm going to talk about interventions where we ask people to be more social, and can that increase happiness? Throughout, I'm going to also show a model or a theoretical framework that guides all this thinking, and also ask questions like, does culture matter? Can the pursuit of happiness backfire? And I hope that you will see that my experiments have very simple instructions. I think they're pretty feasible and easy to scale up in organizations, companies, workplaces, schools, hospitals, et cetera. Okay, so how can we increase happiness? So let's start by talking about intervention research. So fortunately, tons of randomized controlled interventions have been conducted that show that people can become happier when they deliberately practice what I call positive activities or positive practices. Activities like expressing gratitude, savoring happy days, visualizing your future, acting more extroverted, acting more kind, et cetera, et cetera. So my lab has been testing the conditions under which these activities are most successful in making us happy, but we're also interested in the question of whether there are conditions under which sometimes the pursuit of happiness can actually backfire and undermine our happiness. So we'll also talk about that at the very end. We'll talk about both the sunny and the dark side of the pursuit of happiness. I think that's important. So my lab conducts what we call positive activity interventions or happiness interventions. Essentially, these are clinical trials, but instead of testing a new vaccine, we're testing a happiness activity. And so we instruct our research participants to engage in a certain activity like expressing gratitude for 4 weeks or 6 weeks or 10 weeks, sometimes as short as 1 week. And then we follow them across time to see if that activity makes them happier. And then, of course, we also have various control groups and comparison groups. Control groups are actually very hard to design in our research because almost everything that we ask people to do, they interpret it in a slightly positive way on average. So that's good news for humanity, but it's bad news for research. It's hard to create a neutral control group. Anyway, so for last 27 years, so This work I've been doing since 1998. So for 27 years, we've been primarily interested in how and why people can become happier. And I hate jargon, but sometimes you can't avoid it. We are looking at sort of what moderators and mediators underlie the success of positive activities. Okay, so I'm going to start by showing you the model that drives our research that was developed with my former graduate student, Kristen Leyes, who is now a tenure professor at Cal State East Bay, which is a university in California. And this model has been, that I'm going to show you, has been sort of very valuable in testing predictions. But actually, before I get to the model, I want to just tell you that Kristen and I just finished a really huge paper that I thought maybe some of you might be interested in reading. So it's a little bit of a promotion. Honestly, as a scholarly paper, I think I'm most proud of this paper than anything else I've ever written. So it's in the Handbook of Social Psychology. It was just published 2 months ago. It's free. You can download it in 20 seconds. It's online. It's 150 pages with 100 pages of references. So it's a review of the entire field of well-being from the psychological, I should say, the psychological science of well-being, not other fields, and also provide a model that's sort of a grand, quote, grand model of the field of well-being. So if you're interested, I do think it's a really good paper in terms of the goals that it's trying to cover. Again, it's free and digital. Okay, so that's in the Handbook of Social Psychology. Okay, so back to what I promised to show you, this model of well-being. So basically, this model is asking the question, when you engage in a positive activity, let's say you try to express gratitude, why does that make people happier? So the top here part of the model is the why question, which is also the mechanism question. So when I express gratitude to my mom, maybe it promotes me, it fosters a sense of connection with her. Maybe it inspires me to call her up and ask her to have lunch with me. So so that it prompts positive behaviors, and that's sort of the why. That's why I get happier. This model also asks the question, how? How does that work? What are the moderators? And so we focus both on the happiness seeker, the person who's trying to become happier. Are they motivated? What is their culture? What is their personality, right? Does that matter in terms of the pursuit of happiness? We also look at the features of the activity itself. So what is the right dosage of the activity? Is it focused on yourself? Is it focused on others? Does that matter? So that's the how of the pursuit of happiness. And then fit is in sort of the middle. I'll talk about that later. So anyway, we're going to return to this model throughout the talk. Again, it sort of guides all the research that we do, the how and the why. By the way, my book, The How of Happiness, one reason it's called The How of Happiness is because it's looking at sort of the how. It's also sort of a how-to book. Okay, so let's start with gratitude. I think that's going to be our first. Where's that computer over there? Yeah. Okay, there we go. Yeah, I think it's just a little bit slow. Okay, so you all know what gratitude is. There are different ways of inducing gratitude, as most of you know. And I'm going to start with actually the very, very first intervention that we ever did, first happiness intervention we ever did in 1998. I believe my lab was the first to do an RCT, a randomized controlled trial, trying to increase happiness, although we didn't publish it for a long time after that. So anyway, okay, so we had volunteers count their blessings. And so we had them count their blessings either once a week or 3 times a week. And this is an old study that some of you probably know about. And I like to start with it again because it was the very first intervention. So we had volunteers count their blessings, keep a gratitude journal, write up to 5 things for which they're grateful. And again, they either did it once a week, every Sunday night, or they did it 3 times a week, so Tuesday and Thursday and Sunday nights. And so these were the instructions that our participants got. And by the way, we typically tell our participants that they'll be engaging in a positive practice. We try to equalize demand characteristics between all the conditions, including the control group. We don't tell people, try to be happy or try to be as happy as possible. Okay, so we also, in all of our studies, we try to track the effect of happiness. Typically, we administer online multiple convergent measures of well-being and combine them into a single index. In this particular study, we also had a gratitude measure. There was a 3-item measure. And I'm sure many of you are experts on measurement, but I'll just show you some sample items. So for this particular study, this is a sample item from the Satisfaction with Life scale. This is a sample item. The next one is from my own happiness measure, the subjective happiness scale. And then we always measure positive and negative emotions. Remember, there's the affective component of happiness. So we have like usually 8 or 12 positive and negative emotions. Here's an example of how joyful, peaceful you've been feeling lately. So that's those are examples from positive affect. Okay. So in terms of the results, interestingly, in this study, we found something that we did not expect. And so these are changes in gratitude and changes in happiness from right before to right after. This was a 6-week intervention. And you'll see here that we found that only the group that counted their blessings once a week became more grateful and became happier over time relative to the other groups. The groups that counted their blessings 3 times a week did not get happier. By the way, this was a relatively small study and had a pretty small effect. Since that very, very first experiment in 1998, we've run many more studies, much larger studies. We now know better to run larger studies. Right now, I am involved in the Global Happiness Mega Study some of you may know about. So Elizabeth Dunn and others are sort of running it. And so we are doing happiness interventions all around the world in many countries with many, many participants to really sort of test whether all of these interventions are replicable, because we have lots of little studies. We don't have really giant studies yet. But I do believe that small effects aggregate over time. They sort of accumulate over time. Okay, so in this study, we find that it's important to pay attention to the dosage of a positive activity. So there was something about expressing gratitude once a week that seemed to be powerful, and maybe 3 times a week was too often. So I'm going to go back to my model. So basically what we found is that the dosage mattered. Maybe if you express gratitude too often, it becomes boring or stale, or it loses its meaning, or it becomes shallow. Maybe you find it hard to think of something to be grateful for, so you conclude, I must not have a lot of fortune in my life. We actually did a study where we manipulated how many blessings people wrote down, how many things to be grateful for. We had people write down either 2, 4, 8, 16, or 32 things to be grateful for. And what do you think was the magic number? Sort of that had the highest association with positive emotion? 2, 4, 8 blessings, 16 or 32? 8. So actually it was 8. Yeah, we actually thought it'd be like 4, but we have to replicate that study. But we do need to sort of understand the sort of importance of dosage, right? That maybe if you do something too often, it might become, boring or just like not very meaningful. So that was just the first study that we did where we tried to do that. Okay. Now, we actually don't do a lot of counting blessing studies. I don't find them as powerful because, it's just hard to kind of really authentically, really feel very, powerfully grateful when you sort of write a list of something. So we generally, most of our studies, we ask participants to write gratitude letters. And so this is an example of a gratitude prompt we use, where we ask people to think about a person in their life who've supported you over the years, and you write them a letter. You don't share the letter, because if you share it, that's a whole other, it's a whole other activity. It's a confound. So we've done dozens of experiments where we ask people to write gratitude letters. Just very recently, my graduate student, Tanya Vanoy, is testing how AI can help people write gratitude letters. Some people just aren't very good writers, or just they're having a hard time expressing emotions. And so we're doing a study where people are using ChatGPT to write gratitude letters, and then we're also either revealing to the recipient that we use ChatGPT or not, right? Because it turns out we think that it doesn't matter as much as you think, right? That you still are getting a gratitude letter. So anyway, so lots and lots of research in this area. So let me tell you about an experiment where we did this, where we actually had high school students in the US. We had 4 different high schools. These are 9th and 10th graders, so they're 14 and 15 years old. We had them write gratitude letters to their coaches, their parents, and their teachers. And we had them do it over the course of a month. So once a week over the course of a month, they wrote gratitude letters. The control group wrote about their daily activities. So typically we use this as our control group. We describe it as an organizational task. So this will help you organize your time if you write out your activities over the course of a week. So the control group also thinks they're doing something at least mildly positive. So we did this, and so we expected that students who wrote gratitude letters would be happier, more satisfied with life than students who engaged in a sort of neutral activity. And we did find that. So this is actually kind of interesting. If you look at students, either middle school students or high school students or college students, their happiness and their motivation tends to decrease over the course of the year, over the course of the semester. It's kind of depressing, right? They start out kind of gung-ho and happy, and then they lose motivation, lose satisfaction. So you see the control group. This is a course of a 4-month period. It's a 6-week intervention with a 3-month follow-up. So you see the control group is losing satisfaction over the course of the 4-month period, the semester. But you see the gratitude group, the students who wrote gratitude letters, they actually are buffered from this decrease in satisfaction that we see. Now, we also thought that gratitude would also inspire these students to be better. Okay, so here's the interesting thing. Gratitude used to be thought of as a passive emotion. It's like, oh, I'm grateful, I sit back, and I'm just kind of happy with my life. I don't have to do anything, right? We thought that that was wrong, and that gratitude is actually not passive. The gratitude is actually inspiring and elevating and motivating. And the idea is that if you are truly grateful for your mom, right, who maybe took on an extra job so that you could have music lessons, right? That you would actually try to do well and practice at your music lesson, right? You want to make your mom proud of you. You want to prove yourself worthy. Like the math teacher who stayed after school to help you with math, they didn't have to do it. They went over and beyond their job. You want to make your math teacher proud of you, right? You want to make them prove yourself worthy of their efforts on your behalf. So we thought gratitude would inspire these kids, and it did, at least in some extent. And so we asked them, do you want to be a better person? Do you want to improve yourself? And the students who wrote gratitude letters said yes. They're more likely to say yes, they wanted to improve themselves. And then this is one of my favorite findings. We tracked students' eating behavior across time because we thought that also students who were more grateful would want to sort of be better person, be better people, be healthier, and be kinder. And so we found that the students who wrote gratitude letters over a 4-month period, they actually ate more fruits and vegetables. They ate less junk food and less fast food relative to the control group. You see the control group is actually, their eating behavior gets worse over time, maybe because there's more schoolwork and tests and all that. Okay, so gratitude is a really, really powerful and interesting and rich emotion to study. If you have any ideas for other studies that we could do to test our gratitude hypotheses, I would be interested in talking to you. Just very quickly, some other studies we've done that are sort of recent studies on gratitude. Here's a study where we asked people to express gratitude 3 different ways: via text to someone, social media, like on Facebook. You know, sometimes people kind of announce, like, I'm so grateful to my mom, right, on social media, or privately write about it. We actually found that all 3 groups were equally happy, but one of the groups was felt more connected than the other groups, and that's the group that texted someone one-on-one. So, and actually, I'm a huge fan of texting gratitude notes, and actually, if everyone here today wrote a text to someone in their life, sort of a little gratitude text, I think we would make the world a little bit of a better place. I think that's a really great thing to do, and make you happy, it'll make them happy. Okay, another study we did, we found out that writing gratitude letters or essays was more happiness promoting than gratitude lists. Again, it's more rich, there's more to write about. Also, interestingly, more indebtedness promoting. So if you write a gratitude letter, it also makes you feel more indebted. We also found in this other study that we asked parents, okay, anyone here have kids in college? Do you have kids in college? Okay, so we asked parents who have kids in college, we asked the kids to write gratitude letters to the parents. Isn't that amazing? And so the parents were really happy, and they were more grateful, actually. So we found gratitude for gratitude. So if you get a letter from your kid in college, expressing gratitude to you, then you're more grateful. So that's what we found in this study. We also found that witnessing gratitude makes people happy. So you know when you read someone else's gratitude letters or gratitude expression, it's kind of inspiring. So we also found witnessing gratitude makes people happy. Okay, so that's it for now for gratitude. Let's switch gears and talk about how doing simple acts of kindness can make people happier. I actually call it, by the way, in psychology, we call this pro-social behavior. This is actually even more powerful sometimes than gratitude, because when you help others, it's very concrete, it's very noticeable, it's more salient than maybe even than gratitude. And so I'm going to describe a typical study in this space. We've done lots and lots of kindness studies, a lot of them are a month or 4 weeks in duration. So here's a typical study we do where we ask people, we have 4 groups. So in the key group is called Other. So we ask people to do 3 kind acts for others over the course of 4 weeks. Usually we have them do it all in one day. So let's say for the next month, every Monday, do 3 new kind acts for other people that you don't normally do, right? Because we often do kind acts anyway. The world condition, we ask people to do 3 kind acts for the world. So that's like picking up litter, maybe doing something good for the environment. The self is do 3 kind acts for yourself. So this is also makes people happy, self-care. Maybe you can treat yourself to like a nap or a massage or a piece of chocolate, right? And then control, keep track of daily activity. So it's a neutral activity. And so in this particular study, this is actually an actual study we did. We had a diverse group of adults. This is a typical kind acts prompt that we use. Just think about someone or help a colleague with a task, do a chore, visit a sick friend, do 3 acts of kindness. We also have done studies, we ask people to recall acts of kindness. It turns out that just remembering kind acts from the past also makes people happier. Okay, so the results from this study, you see, this is a flourishing. Over time, flourishing is a measure of well-being that we used. So you see the blue line from baseline to post-test, that's a 4-week period. Follow-up was a 2-week follow-up. The groups that did acts of kindness for others or for the world, they got happier over time and even stayed happier even 2 weeks after the study was over. The other 2 groups kind of didn't really change in time. By the way, I think if you do kind acts for yourself, you do feel good in the moment. It just doesn't necessarily translate when we ask a week later or 4 weeks later how you feel. So this is a kind of a typical result that we have. So ironically, this study showed that if you want to make yourself happier, you should try to make someone else happier, right, by helping them. So it turns out we actually find that in most of our studies that if you focus attention on other people, anything you can do to take your attention off of yourself tends to make people happier, right? Because we tend to be too self-focused. And so, but if you're too self-focused, in this study, being self-focused didn't actually have iatrogenic or adverse effects. So I'll go ahead and go back. If you do kind acts for yourself, you sort of like stay flat. You can imagine if you're too focused on yourself, that could actually have negative effects. So we'll talk about that later. Okay. Now earlier we talked about how expressing gratitude can have benefits over and above make people happy. We've also been finding that doing acts of kindness can help benefits to people over and above making them happy. So we have been doing studies where we not only do we measure well-being, but we also collect blood from our participants. And these studies we were doing with actually a friend of mine from grad school. His name is Steve Cole, C-O-L-E. He founded the field called social genomics. And so we send blood to his lab at UCLA in California, and he assays it. And I'll tell you what we've been finding. Okay, so this is the same exact design I showed you before. We have 4 groups. We ask people to do either we randomly assign people, do acts of kindness for others, do acts of kindness for the world, do acts of kindness for yourself. By the way, the kind acts to self is a really nice comparison group, right? Because it's also kind act, but it's for yourself, not others. Or control group, we measure happiness before and after. We take their blood before and after. And this is what we found in this first study that we did. Basically what we found is that, and I'll explain what this means, that only in the group, you see this other condition, only the group that did kind acts for others showed changes in their immune cell gene expression associated with a healthier immune profile. And basically what this decrease that you see is a decrease in pro-inflammatory gene expression, so downregulation of pro-inflammatory genes. So think more inflammation is bad, right? So you want to have less pro-inflammatory gene expression. Since that study we've done, by the way, I should say that gene expression is not actually health, it's a marker of health, right? So we think it's a marker of health. We replicated this study that was a very similar study where we also found that people who did acts of kindness for others, not only did they show changes in less pro-inflammatory gene expression, but also more antiviral gene expression. And then also just a couple months ago, my former student, Ramona Martinez, she's now a professor, for her dissertation, she asked people to simply act more social. And people who had more social also showed less pro-inflammatory gene expression, more antiviral gene expression, and greater sympathetic nervous system, or greater, less fight or flight gene expression. So we also have the similar finding now with acting more social. I'll get to that. Another finding in kindness, we usually do studies on adults. Sometimes we do studies with kids. We did a study with middle school, 9, 10, 11-year-old kids, where we asked them to do acts of kindness. This was in Vancouver, Canada. And we found that kids who did acts of kindness for others, not only did they get happier, but they also became more popular with their classmates. They increased in peer acceptance. So most of the acts of kindness were done at home, so something rubbed off on them when they came back into the classroom. The other kids liked them more when they helped each other, when they helped their family at home. So that's pretty cool. Okay, so that was sort of acts of kindness studies. But the more we did these sort of acts of kindness studies, remember in psychology we call this pro-social behavior, the more we thought, well, is it the pro-social behavior that makes people happier and healthier, or maybe it's the social part of the pro-social that is really the key to happiness and health, right? Is it that, because when you're helping others, usually it forces you to engage with and connect with another person, right? So it's, yes, you can help anonymously, but that doesn't happen in our studies. Even when you give money to charity anonymously, you might also visualize like another person that you're helping, or people. And so we thought, well, maybe we should just test and see, is it the kindness that matters, or is it just sort of social behavior that matters? And so my lab did an experiment with more than 500 working adults. And so we compared these two kinds of activities. Half of them we asked, well, no, there's also a control group. We asked them to do 3 more kind acts per week than they normally do, just like you saw before. But then other of these adults, we asked them to do 3 social acts per week they don't normally do. So these are all adults working at different companies. And so, for example, every week, maybe chat with your colleague in the hallway, right? That would be like a social behavior that's sort of that you don't normally do. Call up someone on the phone. Pro-social acts, help your colleague with a computer problem, or bring them a cup of coffee, right? So, and then we asked them, how connected do you feel? So we found that, interestingly, there was no difference in how connected people felt, how many connected moments they had. So we asked them, when you were bringing the cup of coffee to your friend, how close did you feel to them? Did you feel in sync with them? Did you feel a sense of warmth? Did you feel a sense of mutual trust? Or when you were just chatting with your colleague in the hallway, did you feel warmth and trust and in sync and all of that? And we actually found there's no difference. So both the people who did kind acts and who were just social, they felt more connected over time relative to the control group, but no difference. We also had another interesting finding from that study, is we asked people, how did you help, or how did you socialize? And we found that there's 3 ways to interact with other people that was associated with the most level of connection, and that was in person, or on video, or by phone. So that was actually interesting, that those 3 were much more connecting than by text or social media, et cetera. So there's something, what do those 3 things have in common? All 3 involve voice, right? There's something about voice where human beings are hardwired, right, to hear each other's voices. They're all synchronous. 2 of them involve faces. We actually have a whole line of research where we're studying the role of technology in happiness, and social media use and screen time, and how that affects the happiness of people, especially. And you probably all know this, right? It's really one particular group that may be harmed by social media and screen time, and it's tweens and teenager girls, right? So they're girls that are more harmed than boys. Okay, so the medium, we found in the study, the medium mattered. The more visual, voice, synchronous contact, the more connected people felt, and the happier they got in this particular study. Okay, so then we thought, interesting, so when we have people just act social, just be engaged in more social interactions, that seems to really make a difference. So we thought maybe we'll just do studies where we ask people to act more social. All right, so let's see if that's happening. Okay, so we have another, I'll just skip this for a second. All right, here it is. So we did a study where we just asked people to simply act more extroverted over the course of a week. And then the second week, we asked people to act more introverted, or vice versa, We didn't use the words introverted and extroverted because at least in Western culture, extroversion has a more positive connotation, and so we use the words talkative, assertive, spontaneous for extroversion. And so, so again, people either acted extroverted for a week or introverted for a week or counterbalanced. And so first, we did find that people who acted extroverted did actually report a lot more extroverted behavior during the extroversion week, less extroverted behavior during the introversion week. That's just basically a manipulation check. But we actually got the biggest effect sizes in this study of anything we've ever done. So people got a lot happier when they acted extroverted or more social, or they experienced more positive affect, greater well-being measured different ways, greater flow. So we were actually surprised about this because I'm a fan of introversion. There's lots of benefits of being an introvert. So I didn't think there's anything wrong with being an introvert. But in this study, people were a lot happier during the extroversion week. They actually got less happy on some measures during the introversion week. So you see here, the positive affect actually went down when people acted more introverted. I should say it was just a week. And more importantly, or as important, we did not find moderation by baseline personality. So both introverts and extroverts benefited equally from the study. Other studies show the same thing. There's one study out of Australia that does find a moderation by introversion where introverts benefited less. So that we still need to do more research on this. But again, this is 1 week only. Maybe if you do it for more than 1 week, the introverts would have gotten exhausted. But also, we let our participants define what we meant by introversion, extroversion, right? So they didn't have to be like the life of the party. To act extroverted, they could just maybe just talk a little bit more at lunch or, call up a friend. So we let them sort of define introversion, extroversion. Okay. So here we decided, wow, being social really matters. I'm gonna get back to that. Okay, another important finding from our happiness intervention that I'm not gonna talk about today is that culture really matters. It's kind of unfortunate because what is it? 70 countries are represented here, and so I could give a whole other talk about the importance of culture in the pursuit of happiness, but I decided not to do that today. And so basically, if we want to scale these interventions across the world, of course we need to know whether these interventions are going to be equally effective across cultures, and they're not always effective. Sometimes in some cultures we are finding some of these interventions make people less happy. So for example, we did a study where we asked Korean college students to write gratitude letters, and they actually became a little bit less happy. Okay, so we have to be very sensitive to cultural differences, and I'm happy to talk about that later. And the importance of culture is really one example of the importance of fit. So basically, the practices that might work in the United States or Luxembourg or in Japan are not necessarily the ones that might work in other countries. So fit is basically the way we measure fit, by the way, is we ask people, does this feel meaningful to you? Is it enjoyable to you? And does it feel natural to you? So meaningful, enjoyable, and natural. And so that's what fit is. And we find that the greater the fit between a person and the activity that they're doing, if it could be fit with your personality or your goals or your strength or your culture, the more likely you're going to put effort into the activity, the more you're going to benefit from it. Okay, so fit is really, really important. I talked about fit in my 2008 book, The How of Happiness. I think it's so important because a lot of books on happiness are like, you should do X, you should do this, you should do that. But it really depends on the person, right? Not everyone's going to benefit from every activity. Okay, so fit is really important. And one reason fit is important is because sometimes the pursuit of happiness can backfire. So I do want to say a few words about that. So depending on how you're pursuing happiness, sometimes it could actually undermine your well-being. So my former student Megan Fritz and I wrote a paper about this where we were interested in the conditions under which the pursuit of happiness sometimes might actually make people less happy, not more happy. And so we have 5 different categories that we sort of summarize these things. And the first one has to do with dosage. And so we talked before about how optimal dosage, right, can maximize gains and happiness, but suboptimal or incorrect, right, or inappropriate dosage might actually undermine your happiness. But I think overdosing is the biggest risk, right? Like if you're being too kind, right? Because sometimes people are too kind to others, right? We all know people who kind of neglect themselves and they're always helping others, right? So if you could be too kind to others, if you're too grateful too often, right, that actually might backfire and might actually make you less happy. Second category that we wrote about is valuing happiness too much, right? So if you value happiness too much, if you're obsessed with it, if you ask yourself, am I happy yet? Am I happy yet too often? If you're too focused on sort of the end goal rather than enjoying kind of the journey to get there, that's going to make you less happy, not more happy, right? We all know people who are sort of, maybe they're sort of too focused on being happy. Maybe they feel like they're entitled, they deserve being happy, and so they're going to be disappointed if they don't reach a certain level of happiness. And we all know that measuring happiness, monitoring it too much, it might actually undermine your happiness. I already mentioned fit a little bit. So the idea that, right, if something you do is not fitting, can make you less happy. We did a study a long time ago where we asked depressed college students to write gratitude letters, and they became less happy. So we actually stopped the study in the middle because we didn't want to make them less happy. And so we started thinking, and actually mental health professionals started telling me, sometimes it's not a good idea for my depressed clients to do gratitude. And so if you're depressed, it might actually make you really lonely to feel like if you can't identify someone to be grateful for, it might make you feel really guilty that you haven't repaid that person, or make you feel worthless that you sort of needed that help in the first place. One of the biggest suicide risks is feeling like you're a burden on other people, like you're a burden on your friends and family. So if you ask depressed people to consider, think about how much your friends and family have helped you, right? And how grateful you are for them, that actually might make them feel even worse, right? It's going to make them feel like even more of a burden. And so we have to be very careful about doing these interventions, right? Depending on the population that we do them with. And so fit is really important. Another category we talked about is that sometimes when you are doing an act of kindness or you're expressing gratitude, it actually could backfire. I'm not sure why this is not working. I'll keep trying. And so has anyone here ever done an act of kindness and it makes you feel worse? Right? Sometimes maybe it doesn't work. It's not really helpful. Sometimes sharing gratitude can be very awkward, right? Make people feel uncomfortable. So sometimes whatever you're doing to be happier can actually make you feel worse, make you feel less connected. So if you're trying to help someone and it's not helping them, you actually feel less connected and less competent. And similarly, the last category that I want to talk about is the effects of the pursuit of happiness on other people. There's almost no research on this, about the social costs of the pursuit of happiness. We found in one study when we had people help others, we did a study in Madrid, and we found that observers actually felt worse because they saw other people helping each other, and they actually, instead of being inspired, they actually were a little envious or jealous. Or here's one of my favorite topics of research is there's research on visible versus invisible kindness. Let's say you're visiting your elderly parents or grandparents, and you're like, hey, mom and dad, I'll go to the grocery store and I'll buy you groceries, right? And that could actually make them feel worse because it sort of highlights that maybe they're having trouble going to the grocery store by themselves. So visible kindness can actually be patronizing and make people feel worse, but invisible or sort of subtle help is better, right? So maybe you sort of drop by the grocery store and you bring them something, but you don't highlight it in that way. So you want to sort of do your activities in a way that doesn't harm other people. Okay, great, perfect timing. Okay, so basically, and I have a few more things to say. So after 36 years of research, I have landed on a cliche, okay, which is that other people matter, which is that connection is the key to happiness. So if you want to be happy, don't focus on yourself, focus on other people, focus on how spending time with other people, focus on how other people have helped you, and focus on helping other people. So I found that other people matter. So for these reasons, today, my lab is focused on connection. We're studying how do we promote social interactions? How do we promote conversations that are deeper, that are more meaningful, that are more substantial, that are less shallow? I'm done with small talk. I don't do small talk ever. I mean, life is too short, right? You have to have real conversations, right? Not small talk conversations. And how to make people feel loved. And I just finished a book. By the way, I'll show this to you again, but I have a newsletter that you might be interested in. That's the QR code right there. I just finished a book with my colleague Harry Reese called How to Feel Loved It's already on Amazon, but it comes out on Valentine's Day. And it's about basically these topics. It's about how to have conversations in ways that make the other person feel loved and that make you feel loved. So I'm going to give you a 2-minute preview of that book. And I'm going to first start with my #1 happiness tip. So if I were to choose one thing that all of you could do to become happier today or tomorrow, literally my #1 happiness tip is to have a conversation with someone. Okay, 15 minutes minimum, okay? Just to have a conversation with someone. It could be your partner, it could be your child, it could be a stranger, the barista at the coffee place. To have a conversation with someone. That is my #1 happiness talk. Obviously, this is what we're doing here at this conference, is having conversations. And I'm also going to give you 3 quick tips, and this is from my upcoming book, 3 Secrets to Social Connection. When you're having that conversation, okay, the first thing is I want you to engage with what we call a sharing mindset. So don't do what we always do in conversations, especially when we meet someone for the first time, is we try to impress, right? We want the other person to think that we're kind and we're smart and we're accomplished and we're intelligent, right? And we're funny. But the thing about that is that even though it might impress, it does not forge a connection. What forges a connection is opening up yourself a little bit more, showing more of your full self to others, being vulnerable, right? Just talking about your positive little parts does not forge a connection, right? So share something a little bit deeper about yourself than just whatever's positive about you. The second one we called listening to learn mindset. Now it's your turn, you're listening, the other person is telling their story. Most of us are listen to respond instead of listen to learn, right? So we are waiting for our turn to talk, and I do that, we all do this. But what I want to teach people is to listen like you're going to be quizzed on it tomorrow. Actually, listening workshops do this. They have you basically memorize what the other person is saying, listening, and then ask questions. Ask the person deep, meaningful questions about themselves. When was the last time that you were at a party or a reception or a dinner when people asked you real questions about yourself? Research shows that we want to be asked. We think that we're going to be too nosy or intrusive or it's too personal, but we actually want to be asked real questions. So ask questions. And the final thing is called radical curiosity. Even if you show all the right listening behaviors, you need to show genuine, authentic interest and curiosity in the other person. It's really, you can't fake it. You have to find something in the other person or what they're saying that you are authentically interested in. Again, when was the last time you were at a party or event and the other person you're talking to was so curious about you, they could not wait for you to tell your story, right? They're just like so excited to, it doesn't happen very often, right? This is why charismatic people are so charismatic, right? Because they make you feel like they're so curious about you. So try to do that. We do lots of studies. We're doing lots of studies right now on conversations. One of the most interesting ones, we did a study where we had people engage in deep conversations while under the influence of 3,4-methylene, dioxymethamphetamine, which is MDMA or Molly, versus methamphetamine, which is meth. And it turns out that whether you're on meth or Molly, you feel much more connected to other people. So we're doing studies on that. We're doing studies with couples. So we have lots of research on that. Okay, so that's it for today. I know I'm talking really fast. Okay, so thank you for listening and thank you for being curious. If you're interested in sort of various insights about the science of happiness, I started a newsletter not long ago, every 2 weeks, and there's a QR code for that, where I'm talking about all these different findings and what I think about them. So hopefully there'll be some time for Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you so. It's not working, of course.
Oh,
it's okay. Thank you so much, Sonja. No, I'm just going to stand here by your side. So thank you very much for this fantastic keynote. Not only triggered my intellectual curiosity, but it also made me think about what I can do to be happier and what I can do to make other people happier. And during keynotes, so thank you very much about this. So we have about 10 minutes. So what I will propose is that maybe we're going to collect 2 to 3 questions first, and then see how we're going to do. Okay? Thank you. Yes. When it comes to asking your question, please just press the button in front of you, and raise your hand first, and then the microphone. And also, as you were saying right now, if you are pressing the button, then you mute me. So let's do it step by step.
There we go. My question is, you started off with the definitions of happiness, and you gave us the definitions of Diener, saying one is cognitive and one is affect. You now gave us a lot of information. So was this related to affect, and then it will roll over to cognitive? What is that relationship?
Yeah. Thank you for that question. And can you hear me? Yes. So am I muted now? Oh. Is there a button here? Is there a button here, actually? Yes. Oh. I see. So when the red light is on, okay. So, and I'm not a measurement expert, and I know a lot of you are. Well, it's interesting because we often think, well, maybe in some studies we might affect the affective part of happiness, and some studies we might affect life satisfaction, and that they might have different influences in different temporal courses, but we actually have pretty much never found that. We find that the affective and the cognitive facet of well-being kind of go together, right? They're highly correlated. I mean, and we thought that maybe we've been thinking of doing studies, like maybe we could do a study where we like we're interested in looking at high arousal versus low arousal positive emotions, right? Like enthusiasm and joy versus peacefulness and serenity. And so we could do a study where we're having people like meditate versus doing something like really active, right? So, but we still haven't, anyway, the answer is we have not yet found anything that kind of differentially affects those facets. But I'm not saying theoretically it should. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much. It was very interesting. What would be the main differences in the definition of happiness from an African perspective and an Asian perspective compared to an American or Western perspective? No, I was just curious because you were saying culture makes a difference, and that was the question I had.
So I'm not an expert on culture, so I can't answer that question specifically. But actually, that chapter that I showed to people, the 150-page, we have a section on culture where we talk about some differences, and it's really interesting. Like there's some cultures where, for example, there's a feeling that like there's a too much happiness, that there should be a certain amount of happiness, and then more than that can be harmful. Not in American culture, right, but definitely in other cultures. I think maybe in some African cultures. And there's other cultures where some people don't really even believe that the pursuit of happiness is a worthwhile endeavor, right? And then some cultures, right, there's more of a, oh my gosh, there's such interesting differences. And definitely lots of differences in sort of happy emotions and how differently they're experienced. Like one of my favorite findings, or not really a finding, an observation, and it's a language in the Philippines, one of the dialects in the Philippines, where when they talk about emotion, like happy emotion, you know, in English we say, in a lot of languages we say, I am happy, or I am angry, right? And it's very essentialist, like it defines me. And they say happiness is landing on me. It lands on me. It's like a butterfly, and it kind of lands on my arm or my shoulder, or like sadness has landed on me. And so that suggests that it's temporary and fleeting, right? It might go away sometime. Whereas if you say I am sad, then it feels very much like it's inside of me, and it may be hard to get rid of. Anyway, fascinating findings, but I'm not an expert, but we'll have to ask someone else. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonja.
Yeah.
We have two questions, one here, and then a second from Joe.
Okay, thank you for your presentation. I was wondering something that you said at the beginning of your talk, concerning the difference between individual actions, what we can do to become happier, versus structural social dimensions. And I want to know what you think about this, because it's very hard to separate those two, even because the things that you've mentioned are in a way a social structure, like education. We can promote acts of kindness, we can educate people to be more, that's kind of a social structure. So I would like to hear you elaborate on that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, again, is not really my area of expertise, and so, but I know that many people here are studying the sort of environmental and structural aspects. When I give talks at, say, companies or organizations, they often ask me questions like this, and so we talk about how, like, well, maybe like if the leader of a company, role models kindness or humility, or gratitude, right? That might sort of have a ripple effect, right? That might have sort of a trickle-down effect that you could have. You could certainly build in practices in the culture of an organization. But then there's there's so many other ways that we can promote well-being, from like building more parks, and of course, like just giving a minimum income to individuals. And again, I'm not an expert in that, but I believe very strongly that those things are so important. When your basic needs are not being met, right? That it's not going to help you very much to sort of write gratitude letters. But you're right. Some of them are like very intertwined. But then other things, again, like basic income, is a sort of a separate issue that I'm not studying that. So yeah, and I would love to talk. I guess I would love to talk to people more at the conference about those factors. Thank you. Sometimes I'm asked to I was once asked to consult, and they didn't tell me where it was, but I think it was in the Emirates. They were building a city where they wanted to build a happy city. And so they asked me, well, how do we build a happy city? And so I said, well, I think you should build it so that people are constantly running into each other and having more social interactions. Like we know from Festinger, Schachter, and Black that if you live by a staircase, or if you live in an apartment building where people happen to walk by you, or a dormitory in college, right, you have more friends. So things like that can be built in the environment that are really important. Yeah, thank you.
So we're going to take one last question from Joe.
Hi, I'm Joe Sergi. I'm from Virginia Tech, USA. First, on behalf of ISQOLS and our ISQOLS family, would like to express our gratitude and our loving kindness to you for being a leader in this field and propagating the science of, positive psychology intervention. So, I want to also follow up on this whole idea of positive activities and all the stuff that you've done. Great stuff, by the way. Whether the dependent measures were more than positive. We talked about positive affect, life satisfaction, some of them. Whether you kind of transcended into flourishing and possibly you might be aware of actually one of our former members, Corey Keyes, a medical sociologist, done quite a bit on social well-being. Whether you have kind of thought about that, using some of those social well-being measures to demonstrate how some of those positive activities go beyond just making you feel happy, but it would promote eudaimonia and socio-eudaimonia.
Yeah, Corey, actually, I just was on a Zoom call with him like a few days ago, although I hadn't seen him in a long time. So absolutely, we actually use one of his measures in some of our studies, social well-being. So on the one hand, we don't tend to find many differences. On the other hand, so this is kind of what's disappointing. We know from all these studies that happier people have better relationships and better health and are better leaders and make more money. And so we hope that with these interventions, we can move some of those other variables, right? So you think after a gratitude intervention, people might have better relationships, right? Or after a kindness intervention, they actually might be healthier. And we just haven't found that yet. And maybe because the interventions are just too small, right? They're just too short term and too small. We really need to have like really major long-term interventions to actually impact those downstream variables, right? Like the social and the career. We've tried. We have like the genomic data, but those aren't actual, as I said, that's not actually a health variable. It's a biomarker of health, an indicator, if you will. So we haven't found that yet, but we are still looking. So again, maybe we just need more powerful and more durable and more long-term interventions to be able to find those downstream impacts. So thank you. But I believe that they happen, but we just need more powerful interventions.
And this is the end of our Q&A. Thank you again, Sonja. Thank you very much.